In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, Chapter 2. In Petersburg, the summer passed with the usual literary work. I was preparing my books for new editions, reading proofs, and so on. This was the terrible summer of 1915, with its gradually lowering atmosphere from which, in spite of all efforts, I could not free myself. The war was now being waged on Russian territory, and was coming nearer to us. Everything was beginning to totter. The hidden suicidal activity, which has determined so much in Russian life, was becoming more and more apparent. A trial of strength was in progress. Printers were perpetually going on strike. My work was held up, and I was already beginning to think that the catastrophe would soon be upon us, before I even succeeded in doing what I had intended. But my thoughts very often returned to the Moscow talks. Several times, when things became particularly difficult, I remember I said to myself, I will give up everything and go to G in Moscow. And at this thought, I always felt easier. Time passed. One day, it was already autumn. I was called to the telephone and I heard G's voice. He had come to Petersburg for a few days. I went to see him at once, and in between conversations with other people who came to see him on various matters, he spoke to me just as he had in Moscow. When he was leaving the next day, he told me he would soon be coming back again. And on the second visit, when I told him about a certain group I went to in Petersburg, where all possible subjects were discussed, from war to psychology, he said that acquaintance with similar groups might be useful, as he was thinking of starting the same kind of work in Petersburg as he was conducting in Moscow. He went to Moscow and promised to return in a fortnight. I spoke of him to some of my friends, and we began to await his arrival. He returned again for a short time. I succeeded, however, in introducing some people to him. In regard to his plans and intentions, he said he wanted to organize his work on a larger scale, give public lectures, arrange a series of experiments and demonstrations, and attract to his work people with a wide and more varied preparation. All this reminded me of a part of what I had heard in Moscow, but I did not clearly understand what experiments and demonstrations he spoke of. This became clear only later. I remember one talk, as usual with G, in a small cafe on the Nevsky. G told me in some detail about the organization of groups for his work and about their role in that work. Once or twice he used the word esoteric, which I had not heard from him before, and I was interested in what he meant by it. But when I tried to stop and ask what he meant by the word esoteric, he avoided an answer. This is not important. Well, call it what you like, he said. That is not the point. The point is that a group is the beginning of everything. One man can do nothing, can attain nothing. A group with a real leader can do more. A group of people can do what one man can never do. You do not realize your own situation. You are in prison. All you can care for, if you are a sensible man, is to escape. But how escape? It is necessary to tunnel under a wall. One man can do nothing. But let us suppose there are 20. There are 10 or 20 men if they work in turn. And if one covers another, they can complete the tunnel and escape. Furthermore, no one can escape from prison without help of those who have escaped before. Only they can say in what way escape is possible, or send tools, files, or whatever may be necessary. But one prisoner alone cannot find these people or get in touch with them. An organization is necessary. Nothing can be achieved without an organization. G often returned afterwards to this example of prison and escape from prison in his talks. Sometimes he began with it, and then his favorite statement was that If a man in prison was at any time to have a chance to escape, then he must first of all realize that he is in prison. So long as he fails to realize this, so long as he thinks he is free, he has no chance whatever. No one can help or liberate him by force, against his will, in opposition to his wishes. If liberation is possible, it's possible only as a result of great labor and great efforts, and above all, conscious efforts towards a definite aim. Gradually, I introduced a greater and greater number of people to G, and every time he came to Petersburg, I arranged talks and lectures in which he took part, either at some private houses or with some already existing groups. 30 or 40 people used to come. After January 1916, G began to visit Petersburg regularly, every fortnight, sometimes with more of his Moscow pupils. I did not understand everything about the way that these meetings were arranged. It seemed to me that G was making much of it unnecessarily difficult. For instance, he seldom allowed me to fix a meeting beforehand. A former meeting usually ended with the announcement that G was returning to Moscow the following day. On the following morning, he would say that he had decided to stay till the evening. The whole day passed in cafes, where people came who wanted to see G. It was only in the evening, an hour or an hour and a half, before we usually began our meetings, that he would say to me, "Why not have a meeting tonight? Ring up those who wanted to come and tell them we shall be at such and such a place." I used to rush to the telephone, but of course at 7 or 7:30 in the evening, everybody was already engaged, and I could only collect a few people. And some who lived outside of Petersburg, etc., would never succeed in coming to our meetings. A great deal I afterwards understood differently from the way I did then, and G's chief motives became clearer to me. He by no means wanted to make it easy for people to come and become acquainted with his ideas. On the contrary, he considered that only by overcoming difficulties, however irrelevant and accidental, could people value his ideas. People do not value what comes easily to them, and if a man has already felt something, believe me, he will sit waiting all day at the telephone in case he should be invited, or he will himself ring up and ask and inquire. And whoever expects to be asked and asked beforehand so that he can arrange his own affairs, let him go on expecting. Of course, for those who are not in Petersburg, this is certainly difficult, but we cannot help it. Later on, perhaps, we shall have definite meetings on fixed days. At present, it's impossible to do this. People must show themselves and their valuation of what they have heard. All this and much else besides still remained for me at that time half open to question. But the lectures, and in general all that G said at that time, both at the meetings and inside them, interested me more and more.